scientist for IAS. I'm Dr. Arjun Bopanna. So in the previous video, we discussed about classical evolution. Very quickly, let us see the next personality that we need to know in anthropological theorist. So we have the next, who is called as the father of American anthropology, that is Franz Boas. So though we do not put him ideally in any one particular school of thought, his contribution and the contribution of his students have been immense. So therefore, we try and talk about him. We need to know about it. And definitely, you can expect a question very commonly asked in the mains examination. So Franz Boas ke liye, you need to know two things. One, his idea of cultural relativism, and the other one is historical particularism. See, Franz Boas was a critique of classical evolution because he criticized them not based on their theory of evolution, but on their, their lack of fieldwork, their lack of first-hand, experience of a particular culture. Without that, they kind of made judgment about a particular culture. They gave their theories based on secondary data and all of that. So therefore, he advocated that you need to study a particular culture firsthand, you need to do field work, and also he was against them doing comparative study. He said two societies or culture cannot be compared because every culture has its own merits. So he termed them as ethnocentric, or later, we call classical evolutionists as being ethnocentric because they considered their own culture to be superior. So Franz Boas alternatively said that every culture has to be studied in its own merits. So that is where is this cultural relativism. Okay, that means every culture should be studied in its own merits. And then based on that further, he says that every culture should be studied on its own merits by doing field work and ethnographic studies on them. By this, he meant that every culture has its own history, and therefore culture historical studies has to be done for every society. So that is where this historical particularism plays a very important role. And this is very hugely influential because it influenced not only the value system of anthropology, cultural relativism, it made anthropology much more sensitive. It made it much more sensitive, right? It made it much more ethical when compared to the previous theories. And by being much more sensitive, anthropologists today are able to collect much more accurate data. They are not biased because they give equal importance to every culture. So that's where the importance is on this particular concept. Okay, and also historical particularism. That means you go back in time of a particular region, go back in time and study that particular culture's history. That's why it's called as historical particularism. And he says that when you study this, you will see that culture gets invented and it gets spread. Okay, so that is where his students, okay, come up with diffusion school of thought. Okay, Clark Whistler, Alfred Kroeber. Later, when we talk about diffusion, you'll realize that his concept of historical particularism heavily influenced the diffusion school of thought. So therefore, it played a very important role. We need to know him. You can expect a question every other year. They have been asking Franz Boas. So some of his studies also, like study among the Quackity Red Indians, study of the Eskimos, the names of their books, etc., you need to keep in mind. So he criticized classical evolutionists. He questioned their method, that is comparative study. He questioned them of relying on secondary data. And therefore, he came up with his idea of cultural relativism. He adopted a method which is called as historical particularism. And therefore, he gave a lot of importance to fieldwork. He said that anthropologists should go to the field, should do ethnographic study, and therefore he has been influential in training several young anthropologists to do fieldwork, including women anthropologists like Margaret Mead and Ruth Benedict were trained under Franz Boas, and they in turn develop a new school of thought that is called as culture personality school. We'll come to that a little later. So his contribution to fieldwork is immense. So because of all of this, Franz Boas is duly considered as the father of American anthropology. He's sometimes even called as the father of fieldwork, right? So you need to know all these things. He says that he was also against psychic unity of mankind. He says that different culture practices can develop for different reasons. It need not be for that same reason. How it was considered by classical evolutionists that everywhere man behaves similar manner, that is psychic unity of mankind. He says no, it need not be. Different culture elements can develop due to different reasons. And he also gives examples of various cultures where he says that how for different reasons it can. So for example, a group can be formed either due to fusion or fission. These things are there in your notes. You can just quickly refer them to get an idea. You have to substantiate your arguments with giving examples. Next, cultural relativism is his idea. What is cultural relativism? How does it happen? By doing ethnography, etc. You need to know. Similarly, historical particularism, he says how you have to do it. He says you have to trace a well-defined geographical area, enumerate all the culture of that particular area, go back in time and identify a common origin, and from there how it spread, identify breaks so that you will know which is the other culture. So by drawing the boundary or the break, you will get to know that is where the culture spread ends. So this idea was later developed into what we call it as culture center and culture area, right? So that is part of your American diffusion, which was influenced by historical particularism given by Franz Boas. That means every culture has its own history. So thus uniformity is maybe only due to common origin and not because they obey some common law as advocated by classical evolutionists when they gave psychic unity of mankind. So later these things, methods, etc., you need to know. So basically, what is his contribution? He laid the foundation of fieldwork in anthropology, trained several anthropologists, including women. He gave a detailed study of American culture, especially the Red Indians, who he extensively studied things like the tribes of Quackity Red Indians and their cultural practices, etc. He emphasized on cultural relativism, historical particularism. He talked about the spread of cultural trait, which later developed into diffusion school of thought. He rejected scientific racism. He said that racial difference and the cultural development have nothing to do with each other. So every culture can develop on its own merit. It has nothing to do with the racial superiority, etc., as advocated by classical evolutionists, because they said that a particular race has the special ability to develop civilization. So he rejected that idea. He contributed towards the study of language. That is why even today in America, linguistic anthropology is an important subfield of anthropology. A lot of studies are done because he laid that foundation for later anthropologists. He also did important study on folklore. He studied, gave a little bit on physical anthropology also, where he studied the cephalic index and how environment influences cephalic index, especially in his study among the Eskimos. So like this, some of the contribution, crisp points you should remember, 5 to 10 points on each anthropologist has to be kept in mind. Also, not just their certain achievements, but also their critical evaluation. Because when a question like discuss, comment, analyze, evaluate is asked, you have to bring out their limitations, their challenges, or their shortcomings. In case of Franz Boas, the limitation is that he never came up with any theoretical generalization. So it becomes very difficult to develop a science when you don't come up with or don't give any theories or reasoning as to why something is. So he has been criticized. So many of his students towards the end leaves him and follows other teachers because he never came up with any general theories or laws to explain culture. He also neglected cross-cultural comparison, because unless you compare, you will not be able to analyze a particular phenomena much more detailed. He overemphasized on cultural particularism, so he might have missed out the broader human patterns, that is general characters of humans, etc., by being very specific in his approach. Also, his ethnographic approach being time consuming and being very effective also was a problem, because later on when we talk about neo-ethnography, we will see that how even collection of data by anthropologists is not immune from being biased. So those are some of the criticism of Franz Boas Even in Indian anthropology, his influence has been huge because American anthropologists like Robert Redfield, etc., who came to India and did, or his disciples like Mecham Marriott and all came to India and did studies on Indian civilization, were hugely influenced by the basic premise that was laid down by Franz Boas. So these are some of the ideas that you have to remember. Connect it with other aspects of anthropology and other things. When fieldwork is asked, you can use that. When diffusion is asked, you can use that. When ethnocentric and cultural relativism as a topic is asked, you can mention his names. So these are some of the ideas of Franz Boas and his idea of historical and particularism and cultural relativism. Okay, so this is the second theory that you study in anthropology. I hope it was useful, guys. In the next video, we will discuss about diffusion.